I felt so broken. I felt like damaged goods, and I felt cornered by life. And I sat in that space for a while until one day I remember sitting in my house and thinking, life cannot be just about hardships and obstacles and sadness. There has to be other things, the reason why we're here.
Welcome to the Women Inspired podcast, where together we explore ways to live our most joyful, aligned, vibrant lives. On this podcast, we draw inspiration from the lessons embedded in other women's stories, and we use them to catalyze our own growth and success. And we explore concepts and techniques from the fields of psychology and design thinking that can help us thrive and make the most of the one and only life we're ever going to have. My name is April Seifert. I'm a psychologist, an entrepreneur, and a self-proclaimed life experience junkie, and I'm your host and friend along this journey. This podcast is supported by Modern Well, a woman-centered co-opportunity workspace in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Friend, it is time to start living vibrantly, by design, and with intention. Here we go. Hey friends, welcome back to the Women Inspired podcast. My name is April Seifert and I'm your host. And this week you are going to meet one of those incredible women. I interview them from time to time who has gone through something really adverse, really difficult. And instead of letting it swallow her up, she has decided to make something meaningful out of that experience and use that experience to help other people. This week, you are going to meet the incredible Anna Shpilsher. She is a life coach who focuses on helping women after divorce. This isn't a topic that I've covered ever on the podcast, and I'm actually thrilled to cover it with Anna today because it's it's one of those difficult experiences that happens to a lot of people, and frankly, we don't talk about it. And so when someone goes through that difficult experience, they feel like they're alone and they don't know where to turn or what to do to find the help they need and the support they need to move through this really difficult transition in life. Now, Anna is one of those amazing people who she actually went through a really difficult divorce herself. Her husband literally disappeared on her and sent her a text message to tell her he wasn't coming back. He basically told her he wanted a divorce via text. I mean, imagine that situation. She is so candid in this interview and speaks so openly about the pain she felt at that time and the disillusionment and just the confusion about where to go, how negative her life got after that, and ultimately how she turned it around and what she did for herself. And then that pivot in her own life is what led her to feel compelled to help other people who are in a similar situation and turn that difficult experience of hers into something meaningful. So you're going to hear some amazing stuff in this interview. I mean, we're going to talk about negativity and how that becomes a habit. This is psychologically something that is so easy and happens to most of us, frankly. And we're going to talk about your value as a human being and where it doesn't come from. And there's a little bit of a surprise there, I think, for a lot of people. I can't wait for you guys to hear this interview. It is one of those really heartfelt interviews, and I'm just really excited for you guys to meet Anna Shpilsher. So let's roll that interview. Anna, I'm so happy that you're joining us for this episode of the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm really pumped because we met through a mutual friend. I talk about her a lot on the podcast because my experience in her mastermind was so transformational. But Yasna Bursa was a former guest of mine, and you are actually in her mastermind this time around. And we met just randomly when I came and spoke with your group. So I love that we're here and getting to have this more deeper conversation about the work that you're doing.
That is incredible. I just love moments like this because I've been listening to your podcast way before I signed up for my mastermind, and I've wanted to have a conversation with you. And when I learned that you're going to be one of our mastermind speakers, I was just so excited that we connected, and I loved that engagement.
That's awesome. It was a really fun day. Well, okay, so help my audience get to know you a little bit. Just tell us a bit about your backstory.
My name is Anna Shpilsher. I am a data nerd turned life coach. In my late 20s, early 30s, I found myself divorced with two little children in a corporate job and with financial problems. A little bit before that, my husband of 10 years decided that he no longer wanted to have a family, and he just disappeared. And I mean, disappeared from our lives completely. I felt so broken. I felt like damaged goods, and I felt cornered by life. And I sat in that space for a while until one day I remember sitting in my house and thinking, life cannot be just about hardships and obstacles and sadness. There has to be other things, the reason why we're here. And I decided that I'm going to look for answers. I'm going to find happiness, joy, and fulfillment. And I'm going to do everything I can until I find it. And fast forward 5 years, I am in a completely different space. Everything is so different. I found fulfillment. I found joy. I found what it means to feel happy. And I found love again, which I did not think I would go for another time. And I decided that I want to become a life coach and to help women like me who feel hopeless, who feel devastated, but who want answers. And that's when I founded Roadmap to You Life Coaching and became a life coach.
That's amazing. There's been a number of people who I've featured on the podcast who have gone through a really difficult or adverse event themselves. And instead of, staying there and staying in that negative place, they've come back and decided to make something of that event, to use that event to create change and joy or value or knowledge or something in other people who might be going through the same thing. And I'm always so... I always just admire people who do that because it's not easy. It is not easy to go through something difficult and make that pivot. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about, when you talked about your husband just disappearing, can you kind of take us through that journey in a little bit more detail? Like, what was that like? And then how did you come to the realization that you could actually make something out of that?
Absolutely. So I got married rather young, and I'm originally from Russia. I spent half of my life, my first part of my life in Russia and half here in Minnesota. And in Russia, we typically get married earlier than people do in the United States. So I got married young. We had children together, and we actually had a really good life. We were friends. We shared the same parenting style. We really connected. We had a really good relationship for the most part of that 10 years until our second child was born. And then things started to shift a little bit, but I knew two children were both working full time, and this is normal to experience certain adjustment, to experience friction. We're not sleeping. Everybody is nursing or changing diapers and whatnot. And I didn't think much of it, but I definitely felt something has shifted. And we started to grow apart. And again, I didn't think this was a reason to get a divorce or to get separation. In my mind, this is natural progression of the relationship. This is where we start working on it. And I guess looking back, I don't think we've had the greatest communication with each other because our relationship was without arguments for the most part, which I used to be really proud of because I thought, okay, we have a great relationship. So there wasn't anything communicated such as, this has to change. And this is what makes me unhappy. And it just got to a point where one day he said, I'm going on a business trip. I will be back in a couple days. And after that, I got a text message telling me that he no longer wants to be part of this family. He does not want to parent the children, and he's not even in this country. And I remember where I was sitting. I was at work, and my tears just started running down my face. I felt like the ground was moving under my feet. And I thought, I'm just dreaming. This cannot be. Adults don't do it like this. I'm going to wake up and it's going to be all great and figured out. But it actually was my reality. Divorce was something I was planning on not having, if that makes sense. My parents are divorced, and I remember as a kid, I decided I am going to do everything it takes so that my children don't have to go through this. In fact, staying married was the biggest value that I had at the time. Having that taken away from me just shattered everything. So now I already wasn't feeling the best before this happened. And now I lost this one thing that I was holding on to. And it felt like a dark strip, just darkness, darkness, darkness. The only reason I got out of bed during that period of time was because I wanted to keep it stable for my children. That was the only reason. And I would get up and I would fix them something to eat, take them to daycare, go to work, go through the motion, until one day I felt the energy to make something nice for dinner. And I felt, okay, I can do this. And then slowly I was pulling this thread, but still like just so deep in negativity, in pain, in cluelessness of what am I going to do? How am I going to keep this house that was purchased based on two incomes, and now I am sole provider, sole caretaker of my children. And I believe that staying in the house that we were in would create more stability for my kids. So I did keep the house. I knew a lot of people were around me, and a lot of support I received from family and from friends. But one thing I realized is that my normal environment was negativity. Way before divorce, way before things happened, it was just a way we built conversations and the way we connected with people. So not only I had to heal from this experience, but I also had to almost rewire my thinking, rewire my brain. And it was so painful to stay in this place of a single mom, the phrase that I absolutely hated, and continue the way I was. So it almost felt like it was more painful to stay than to try something.
That's huge. And something that you said was so big, that your normal environment was negativity. That I actually did an episode a while back about basically breaking this negativity cycle, like our addiction to negativity. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why it feels very natural for us to be negative. And the reason is that our mind is wired that way. Our mind is wired to keep us alive and to threat seek and to look for things that can hurt us so that we can avoid them. So our mind, if left to its own devices, is scanning, looking for things that are threatening or negative or bad so that we can avoid it. And that's great, right? Like our species exists still, so wonderful. We've managed to get this far. That's adaptive from an evolutionary standpoint. But in terms of how your experience in a modern world day to day goes, there are few deadly threats in our day-to-day lives. Our brain hasn't caught up to what our modern day-to-day life is like. And so there's this negativity habit that we have, And it's really difficult to break. Like, how did you do that? What were some of the things that you did? Because this specific thing is very common for people.
One thing is exactly what I mentioned, realizing that then being negative was part of, being a human being. And once I realized, I'm like, oh, so there is a reason why we're this way, but it feels dark, it feels heavy. And I move forward with this negativity. So I actually have a close, dear friend who said, I cannot take you anymore. You are so heavy talking about the same thing for a year. You have to do something with yourself. So then I went, I did two things. One was I saw my therapist, the woman I saw before divorce. And I made that an ongoing thing until I felt better. And then the other, I actually attended a seminar, Landmark Forum, where my world turned upside down, and it completely, I was among people who have experienced much bigger tragedies than I have. And it made my grief and my adversity shrink, so to speak. And these people found a way out. So can I. And it was never one thing. It's kind of like a yo-yo effect. So you make 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I kept taking courses. I kept reading books. I love personal development books. And the more I learned, the more I realized there is a different life, and it's not a negative life. And I love how it feels when we are in a better space. Am I 100% positive? Absolutely not. Is it an effort for me to stay in a positive space? Yes, all the time.
That's powerful. That's really powerful. And thanks for sharing that, because it's a great example. Well, it's a great example of two things. Number one, it's a great example of how, again, our mind, if left to its own devices, is already biased. It's biased in a negative direction. And in order to even your thinking out, you're not trying to just pretend that everything is good all the time. That's not the point. Your mind is already biased against you. All you're trying to do is tip the scales back to more of an even place. And to do that, that requires putting weight on the other end of the scale, putting intention and effort into the positive side. And that's why we focus so much on it. Like, do a gratitude practice. Think about what your, positive things that have happened. Do affirmations, like all these positive things. Sometimes people neglect to realize that the reason why you're focusing so hard on that is you're trying to tip the scale away, one that's already unequally weighted to that negative side.
Exactly. And it's interesting that the way you said it, we're already leaning toward negative more. And I've gone through circles of being super negative to all the positive, and cannot stand if you're negative and you're a friend of mine, everybody has to be positive. And that is not sustainable either. So what I found to be true for me is that half the time it's going to be great, and half the time it's going to suck. But we have the tools. We know things that work. Like you mentioned, gratitude practice. And there's a million things that we can do to take one tiny little step toward feeling better. And it isn't things around us so much. It is what we can do, and we can. And I'm so grateful for having learned that I can. Things are not happening to me. I have a power to do something about how I react.
It's as though I paid you to say that, which I adore. I adore that that's where you went, because I've talked to a lot of people who have been in adverse situations. I've spoken to a woman who went down on the Miracle on the Hudson plane crash. She's episode number 1. I've spoken to a woman who survived the Holocaust. I've spoken to numerous people who have survived cancer, people who have gone through just incredible adverse events. And what's common about these women who are now thriving, they're writing books, they're helping other people, they are on the speaking circuit, they're like incredibly inspiring educators and, in a helping field now, is that every single one of them did something that I preach all the dang time on this podcast, and they took responsibility for the situation they were in. Your situation is the example that I use so frequently. I'm like, I'm not saying you're at fault or to blame. It was not your fault. You did not cause your husband to leave. Mm-hmm. That's him. Like, he made his own dang crazy decision. Like, that's on him. But in the position that you found yourself in, he's not going to make you happy. Like, he's not coming back. He's not going to fix it for you. You are the only one who can. And so if you're not going to take responsibility, it's not going to get better. And I love that you did. And not only, did you take responsibility for your own life, you're going beyond that now and you're helping other people. And I think that is wonderful. That's so amazing.
I had to redo my whole life. The way I used to live was I have to get education, higher education. That was instilled in me by my parents. I have to have a family. I have 2 children, buy a house. That's it. I will be happy. So when I reached that point, before divorce, I was thinking, well, now what? Do I keep having children to feel this excitement and exhilaration and happiness? But I cannot keep having 10 more children. That is just not going to work. And when life basically forced me to reevaluate my values, I realized that money, house, all that it's one thing, but what really makes me feel fulfilled is helping other people. It was such a crazy revelation. It was never on the map for me before. It feels the amount of joy that one feels helping another person is just indescribable.
That's amazing. I want to talk about that a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the work that you do. Give us just an overview of who the types of people are who come to you, what you typically do for them, like what's your gig? What do you do?
So I work with women after divorce. I work with incredible women who want a different life, who are looking for answers, but they just don't know where to start. And most of them are absolutely amazing, educated, driven. They don't feel happy. They're kind of like me when I had everything, and yet I felt like something was missing. So they'll come to me and say, okay, I have I have a PhD, I have this amazing, well-paying job, I have children, yes, I'm divorced, I'm fine with that, but I don't feel happy. Like, most of my clients come with that, or I feel stuck. I feel like something is missing. And we start looking at what is it that would make them happy. Most of us, or I should say many of us, never have sat down and said, okay, let me write down what happiness is for me, and then let me extrapolate it into what is it that I need to do to get there, and what is it going to look like when I'm there. It's such a simple exercise, but we don't do it for big things like life, right? We do it for financials, we do it for planning a baby shower, for all these things, but not for our own happiness. When we do that, incredible things happen. And that is just the beginning of our work. But that creates a foundation for a roadmap to next steps, to reshifting their life. So one example that I give about myself, after divorce, I was going out a lot. I was juggling children, work, and it seemed like I have this Instagram-worthy life, but I wasn't. Like, I was just anxious and not happy, not there yet, not there yet, not there yet. And then I did this exercise, and I realized that children are one of my top values. And then I went out 3 times that week. And then we ran around like crazy on the weekend, taking them to activities, but really haven't had quality time in a really long time. That took my breath away. That my most important thing, my children, are the time allocated to them is whatever is left. I changed that around and reprioritized. And that's a simple, but I felt so much more like myself. I felt so much more authentic and feeling like I'm doing the right thing. Then comes say no, right? Then you have to say no to all these amazing opportunities because you have chosen to honor your priorities. And that's the next level. Then I walk them through how to handle these things. I walk them through mind management. I walk them through decision making. And if they choose to, then supporting them in dating and finding love again.
Wow, that's huge. And I bet, the unique thing about this, about divorce is that, it's something that a lot of people go through. It's not a super uncommon thing. It's something that a lot of people go through, but it's not something that we go through often. It's not something that we get accustomed to, or that even that people talk about a lot in terms of what that experience actually is. And so, when it happens to someone, that has to be completely blindsiding, and you have to feel just so confused about what direction to go, because there's no good owner's manual for it. There's no good map,
Exactly. It's very, in my experience, it's very disorienting, and it's such a big part of our lives. Everything changes as you take on this new role as a single mom, or the adjustments that we have to make. The whole life that we have, especially here in the United States, it's so stretched thin to places we need to be. And here in Minnesota, we're complete, drivers of our kids. We take them to many different activities, and then there's family life, and all that has to be adjusted. You have to find your new identity. And unless you're seeking out, seminars or read books, you're on your own finding a way out to a different chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that carries, again, it's another one of those, it's almost like mental health, right? It's another one of those things where this affects a lot of people, yet there's a ton of stigma around it. And when it happens to you, you feel like you're the only one, and aren't I ashamed? And oh my gosh, when nope, it's actually not common as in it happens to everyone, but it's more common than that shame would allow us to think it is.
Isn't it interesting that it isn't a rare thing, and yet there's so much shame around it. And I think one of the blocks that held me back for longer than it would have been otherwise is feeling like I'm damaged goods for being divorced. And definitely, if I think about my roots, a divorced woman with children is 100% damaged goods. If somebody decides that they want to be with you and you have children, then they're kind of doing you a favor. And that's my luggage that I went with for a while. And that's how I almost presented myself when I was dating, which makes me sad now.
Yeah, it reminds me of, this is a little bit of an analog, so it's in a little bit of a different domain, but there's some advice out there, and I wish I could attribute it to the right person. It's not me. Someone else came up with this, but I think about this a lot. And it's basically your value as a person. Think about like work. It's the easiest domain to put this in. Your work. Your value is not determined by the criticism you get from people or the mistakes you make, and it's also not determined by the praise you get or the successes you have. Those are just things that happened. Those are just circumstances.
Yes.
Your value is something that is much more fundamental than that and doesn't have anything to do with your life circumstances or your job circumstances. So in this case, to sort of bring it back home and make the connection really clear, your value isn't determined by it doesn't make you a more valuable person because you're married, and it doesn't make you a less valuable person because you're divorced or you're not, or you have different circumstances. You're valuable because you're here. Like, that's it. You're valuable as a person. You know what I'm saying?
I could not agree more. I personally, it took me years to see that, to accept it, and to not attribute successes to feeling more valuable than without, because there's plenty of things that I don't have.
Yep. And that's the hardest one, right? It's hard. And I'm not saying don't celebrate your successes. Absolutely. Like, pat yourself on the back, celebrate your successes, be happy that they happened. But your intrinsic value as a person doesn't shift because you did a good job or you didn't do as good of a job as you wish you did. You have an incredible amount of value that is not linked to those things. It just is an ability level that you had, or maybe there's some luck involved in it. I mean, usually it's an ability level and you did a good job. Great. That's a thing that happened. That's not who you are and how valuable you are.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with you.
So, for my audience out there, there's a decent chance, there's so many women who listen to this. There's a very good chance that quite a few people who are listening to this have either gone through a divorce or are going through a divorce, or, they're in that rocky part of a relationship. What are some of the what's some of the advice you could give to them, or something tangible that you could have them think through to help them in the situation that they're in now if they were in sort of in a rough patch?
Well, one thing I can offer is on my website, roadmap2you.com, number 2, I have a freebie, the 10 Thoughts Guide, 10 thoughts that changed my life, that you can get right now. And what it is the 10 powerful thoughts that are for us to consider, try on. And if your thinking changes, the way you feel will change. How you act or what action you're going to take will change, and it will create a different result. So the first advice that I could give is to take a piece of paper and a pen and write down everything you think about your life right now. And when you look at that list, imagine if you're in this space, what are you going to create? So for example, if I say, single moms are damaged, what am I potentially going to create? I'm going to feel down. I'm going to feel insecure. I'm potentially going to meet a guy who will feel that my kids are a nuisance. That would be one example.
I love that. That's so actionable, and it's so direct to, frankly, the thoughts that we all have when we go through difficult circumstances. So certainly, we're talking about divorce today. It applies there. But I think that's great advice just in general when you're going through a difficult time. Like, get completely self-aware. I joke with people sometimes, like, if you had one glass of wine too much and you got really brutally honest with yourself, what are those thoughts that are coming up? Because sometimes it can be hard to admit to ourselves, I think I'm damaged goods, or I think I'm not good enough for this reason. That can be a tough thing to admit. But once you do admit it, you can start to think about it, I guess, more objectively. And you can start to question that belief a bit. And the more you question it, the less strong it is and the less control it has over you.
Absolutely. When it circulates in our head, sometimes we don't even realize what it is that's nagging at us. And there's something really powerful with writing things down, with journaling, because I am a believer, if you see what's in your head, you're going to be so surprised. Wow, do I really think that I'm damaged goods? I've had that experience, and I was thinking, like, is that really so? Is it true? And sometimes I would say, yeah, I feel this way. And for other things, I'd say, no, this is not true. And when it would come up, I'd have to challenge myself and say, is it really true? And then this is what I maybe can replace it with. But you're right. You have to bring awareness. If there's one thing that you could do is to bring awareness to where you are today and start from here.
I love that. Remind my audience of your website one more time, just so that people know where they can find you online, and then any social channels where you hang out.
Yeah, you can find a lot of information on my website, roadmap2u.com, number 2. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, roadmap number 2u. You can download my freebie. You can send me a message and ask me a question. I am open to hearing from listeners or potential clients all the time.
Amazing. This has been so enlightening. And, whenever I'm in a position of interviewing someone like you who's been through something really difficult and emotional, I'm just always so grateful that you're willing to come on and you're willing to bare your soul and open up about what you've gone through and the difficulty and the emotion associated with it, and those negative beliefs that you had. Those are tough to admit to ourselves. It's even more difficult to come on here, record this, and air it to thousands of people. I mean, that can be really difficult. So I'm just so appreciative that you've been here today, and this was just such a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful, and I really, really hope that one person will hear this and it will help them. That would be meaningful to me.
All right, friends, there you have it. That is my interview with Anna Shpilsher. She is a life coach who focuses on helping women move through divorce. Again, this is the first time I've ever covered this topic on the podcast, and I'm so grateful that we had a chance to do it. It's such a common thing that happens to so many people. There's so much shame around it. There's, so much stigma around it. And whenever there's shame and stigma, that means, that experience goes underground and people don't talk about it, even though it's something that happens to so many of us. And when we don't talk about it, it's really difficult to get the support and the help that you need when you're moving through that type of situation yourself. So, Anna, if you are listening to this, thank you so much for sharing your story, for coming on and sharing your expertise about this very important topic. I want to hit 3 things before we close out. I'm going to hit radical responsibility. I'm going to go there. I talk about it so often, and this is another one of those examples. I've talked to women who have survived cancer. I've talked to women who have survived natural disasters. I've talked to women who have gone through so many adverse events, and this one is another example. And the commonality that they have, the reason that they were able to thrive afterward, is that they took responsibility for the situation they were in. They didn't blame themselves. It was not their fault that they got there, but they looked ahead and said, that path forward is my responsibility, not someone else's. Now, I've seen out on social media, there's a few people who are pretty prominent on social media who would disagree with me on that fact. They would say, you know what? No, it is not up to me. You know what? No, this is not on me to move forward in this situation. And the question that I have for those people, and the question that I want you to ponder, is that if you're not willing to take responsibility for the situation you're in, who are you giving that control to? Who's going to do it? Someone's going to. Someone or circumstances will dictate the path that you take. You're going to move forward one way or another. If you don't take control and you don't take responsibility and you don't intentionally move forward, you're literally allowing other people and circumstances and luck and good or bad fortune to dictate where you go from here. That is one of the most defeating positions that I can possibly imagine operating from. It is not easy. It is not easy to be in a difficult position. I've been there. I lost my dad to cancer. I've been in a position where I've gone blind and been paralyzed and have had to deal with the implications of having multiple sclerosis. I get it. I've been in those positions where you're like, man, this is awful. Man, this sucks. This was not my fault that I got here. I didn't ask for this. But your path forward, that is up to you, or it can be. You can take control. You can take responsibility, and you can take intentioned action to move forward in a direction that you decide, not that you leave up to other people and to circumstances. That's what radical responsibility is to me. Second thing I want to hit is this negativity habit. This is such a big deal, you guys. This is so pervasive. And again, it's not something that is our fault. I mean, this is a human thing. This is the direction that our minds will go if we, don't step in, and if we don't, help it go in a better direction. I did an entire episode called How to Beat the Negativity Addiction. It's episode 59. I did a whole episode on this because it's so common that people go in this negative direction. We relate to each other via negative things. We, commiserate over things. And I'm not saying that's something you can't do. I'm not saying it's something that you absolutely have to rid your life of. That's not realistic. But just know that your brain is already biased in that direction. You're already operating from a biased standpoint. So if you can tip the scales and just even them out a little bit, we're talking about slow evening out. We're not talking about slamming the scale down on one side. We're talking about just start to adjust into a more balanced mindset. Your life experience will change. The challenge and I've put this out there before in prior episodes. This is not revolutionary. This is not mine. This is not groundbreaking, but dang it, it works. For the next 30 days, I want you on social media every single day, every day. I want you to either take a picture of something beautiful, or I want you to take a picture of something that makes you grateful. And I want you to put that on social media and tag me. I want to see these beautiful gratitude photos. And what you're going to notice, oh man, is your brain. I mean, it is powerful, but man, it is not that sophisticated in this type of circumstance. It doesn't take very long for your brain to catch on. Oh, okay, cool. I guess what we look for now is beautiful gratitude things. Okay, cool. It'll eventually kick in. And then what will happen within a couple of weeks is that your brain, from the moment you wake up in the morning until the moment your head hits the bed at night, your brain will be searching for something that's beautiful or something to be grateful for. Think about what your day-to-day life will feel like when your brain starts working in that regard. This exact situation is one of the exact reasons why Ashley and I created Peak Mind, the Center for Psychological Strength. You've heard me talk about it before on the podcast. This is why we created it. It is possible. This gratitude practice is just one example. There are so many ways that you can build psychological strength, and you can point yourself in a direction that is so much better and so much more balanced and improve your ability to thrive through ups and downs. And this episode was such a great example of that. If you guys want more information about Peak Mind, you can head over to peakmindpsychology.com. Sign up to get updates from us. Take a peek at our membership. This is basically gym membership for your mind. We're so excited to be offering it because it's so valuable and it is absolutely groundbreaking. So pop over there if you're at all interested. We'd love to have you. The last thing I want to hit, wow, is it powerful, and wow, is it important? Your value as a person. The fact that you are here, the fact that you exist, that makes you valuable. Your successes, your failures, people's praise, people's criticism, those do not impact your value as a person. They don't. Every single one of us gets one single life. We are one person on this massive planet. Historically, through all the people who have lived here, we are one person. That makes you unique. That makes you special, and that makes you valuable. And no person is inherently more or less valuable than anybody else. You have a right to be here. You have a right to live a full, vibrant, aligned life. It doesn't have anything to do with your successes or failures. That value is intrinsic. That value is foundational to you as a person. Don't let that waver, and don't question it based on your performance on something or what someone thinks of you, whether that's good or bad. That value doesn't waver. That value is more fundamental than that. Think about that as something that is core to who you are, not something that moves around based on the circumstances that you're in. All right, you guys, those are my 3 soapboxes for this week. Woo! That was a good interview. I really loved it. It was really hitting on some things that were really powerful for me, even though I haven't gone through that experience myself. Man, that resonated and was just such a powerful interview. So thank you, Anna, and thank you to every single one of you who tuned in this week. My audience is growing, and I'm so thrilled. So if this is your first time listening to the podcast, hi. I'm seriously excited that you're here. This is wonderful. I love having you here. I love hearing from you. Pop over to my website, shoot me a note, shoot me a comment or a DM on social media. I'm at April Seifert on Instagram. That's usually where I hang out. I'm happy to have you guys. This has just been such an incredible ride, and I am thrilled to see where we go next. All right, all. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Before we close out today, I want to say thank you to my producer, Cameron Hill, and to my incredible sponsor, Modern Well. If you want to learn more about how you can reach your goals in a one-of-a-kind work-life community, visit www.modernwell.co. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who might benefit from this inspiring message. And if you have a moment, click the link in the episode description to leave me a rating and a review on iTunes. It would mean so much to me. Finally, I want to remind you that it is absolutely possible to live a happy, fulfilling life, even in spite of all of the chaos and demands we all experience. Sign up at aprilseifert.com to gain access to tools that will help you do just that. I have carefully created and curated a set of tools that combine the powerful fields of psychology and design thinking to help you intentionally create a fulfilling, happy life you love. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and until next week, stay inspired.